Welcome to News.am. My guest is the former US co-chair of the OSCE Minsk Group, James Uorlík. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your time and joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
Mr. Ambassador, you left the OSCE Minsk Group 6 years ago. How much do you think the group has changed since then in terms of its role and productivity?
Well, ever since it was founded, the Minsk Group and the co-chairs have played an especially important role in bringing the parties together. It was a unique forum as well. As a part of the OSCE, it did bring together as co-chairs France, the United States, and Russia. And even as relations between the US and Russia became strained over other issues, Nagorno-Karabakh was one of the issues where we generally saw eye to eye and could work together. I had a very good cooperative relationship with my Russian counterpart, and I'm proud to say that we worked very well, collegially, cooperatively together, and I hope that that will be the case in the future.
Mr. Ambassador, after the Second Karabakh War, Azerbaijan's leader keeps stating that the Minsk Group has exhausted itself and is no longer needed since the conflict, he says, doesn't exist anymore. Do you think that the Minsk Group mandate is not needed any longer?
I think there still is a role for the Minsk Group. If not the Minsk Group and the co-chairs, then there needs to be another international part of the international community that can take responsibility. I don't think that this should be left solely in the hands of Russia. And I do think that the parties involved in the conflict need the kind of support that comes from the international community in working through the issues. I do believe that there's a role. Now, if you want to create a new kind of vehicle, that I perfectly understand that, but there does need to be some sort of vehicle like the Minsk Group.
Mr. Ambassador, Aliyev also says that the Minsk Group has been of no use over these years to the resolution of the Karabakh conflict. How important do you think were the efforts of the Minsk Group for the negotiation process?
Well, I do think that the co-chairs and the Minsk Group managed to keep discussions underway and possibly avoided a serious conflict much earlier. As it turned out, there has been a conflict, not surprisingly, after this many years, but there continues to be a role for implementation and decisions that need to be taken following the hostilities. And I do believe that the Minsk Group can continue to play a role.
The Armenian and Azerbaijani leaders agreed in Brussels to start preparation for peace talks between Armenia and Azerbaijan. There was no mentioning of the Minsk Group in European Council's President Charles Michel's final statement following the meeting. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated that United States and France have cancelled the format of co-chairmanship of the OSCE Minsk Group, refusing to communicate in this format with Russia. Does this mean that the Minsk Group is being pushed out of the process altogether?
That's a good question. Given the current tensions between the United States, France, and Russia, it's not surprising that the Minsk Group can't operate now in a collegial and cooperative way. That doesn't mean it can't have a role in the future. And I do believe that it could play a role. Now, if the Council of Europe or another body wants to step in its place, and I certainly welcome seeing the Council of Europe president step in such a way, that can work equally well. But as I say, it's important that there be that international community mediation in some way.
Mr. Uorlík, there is a tension in Nagorno-Karabakh for almost a month, but the co-chairs of the OSCE Minsk group have made no one announcement about it up to now. In general, the Minsk group has acted very passively after the Second Karabakh War. Don't you think that the Minsk group itself didn't function at its full capacity during the past 1.5 years? What do you think?
Well, it essentially comes back to the parties involved. If the parties don't want to have the Minsk group cannot be effective. The parties themselves, the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan, need to decide whether the Minsk group can still play a role, and if so, what role that would be. And I believe that the United States, with France and Russia, could play that role. What we don't want to see happen is that the conflict be lost among many other issues, and that the international community does no longer pay attention to what's happening in Nagorno-Karabakh, or that Russia become the sole arbiter, the sole mediator in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. That too would be unfortunate. I do believe there continues to be a role for the Minsk group, and I believe it is an issue that needs to be further talked about in the OSCE and with the two presidents, the president and prime minister.
Azerbaijan wants the peace talks with Armenia to be held on the basis of the 5 points they proposed earlier to Armenia. These points are mostly about recognizing each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity. No word about the rights of Karabakh people. How does this scenario comply with the vision of the settlement that Minsk group co-chairs have always aspired to? What do you think?
Well, I think you come back to the basic principles that have been around for some time. They still form the basis for a lasting peace. Now, territorial integrity is an important part, and I understand that the foreign ministers have been tasked with just such a discussion on where borders are. But those aren't the only issues that need to be addressed. There continues to be the issue of status that needs to be a part of the discussions. I'm actually encouraged to see that the parties are engaging with each other, that the president and the prime minister have met with each other, that the foreign ministers have established a group to begin these discussions. And there are going to be a lot more issues. It's not just about territorial integrity. It's about resource sharing. It's about communications. Of course, for the Armenians, it is about status.
Azerbaijan insists that Armenia should withdraw all territorial demands to Azerbaijan, thus enforcing territorial context to the conflict, while the Armenian side says it's not about territory, it's about the right to self-determination of the Armenian people on their historic land. During the years you were in office, what was your impression of the essence of the conflict?
Well, it was always going to be a very difficult conflict to resolve, because there is a natural tension between the issues of territorial integrity and status. And there continues to be that same status, that same tension. But if there's going to be a lasting peace, everyone knows that all of the issues need to be on the table for discussion, and not simply territorial integrity. And I believe that the Azerbaijanis have always understood that there are a lot of issues that are going to need to be resolved. And what we don't want to see is that they're resolved on the battlefield. These have to be done in negotiations, and these negotiations will not be easy. They're going to take time. There are a lot of issues to work out, but it needs to be done for a lasting peace for both parties.
Mr. Ambassador, all co-chair countries have announced that the status of Nagorno-Karabakh is still unresolved. There's often an impression in Armenia that these statements conclude the status out of Azerbaijan's control. What status exactly do co-chairs mean when speaking about the future status of Karabakh? What's your impression?
Well, it is an issue that the people of Karabakh need to be involved in. It's always been the case that the issue of territorial integrity needs to be resolved, but there would also need to be consultations and some form of vote or referendum at the correct time by the people of Karabakh. I think that that is still on the table, and that can form the basis of status. We've always talked about some kind of a referendum among the people of Karabakh, and I believe that that's still a case, and I believe that it will need to be a part of discussions as the parties move forward.
In one of your recent interviews, Mr. Ambassador, you said that there will be no lasting settlement in Nagorno-Karabakh without the issue of status being addressed. When and under what circumstances can the issues of the Nagorno-Karabakh status and the implementation of the right to self-determination of the people of Karabakh be back on the agenda again?
Well, that needs to be on the agenda. I hope the foreign ministers are talking about that, because there can't be just the issues of establishing borders and redrawing the map. There needs to be some discussion of the issue of status. And I believe that Armenians are insisting on that. And I believe the Azerbaijanis understand that that needs to be a part of discussions. Now, if you want to start with delineation of borders, particularly in light of the presence of Russian forces there and all of the changes that have come in the wake of the conflict, that's understandable too. But it can't be done, if you want a lasting peace, to simply set aside the issue of status. It does need to be one that is addressed by the parties, and I think it will be in the course of the discussions.
And Mr. Ambassador, what do you think? What is the role of Turkey in the current phase of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict after the Karabakh Second War? Does Ankara seriously influence on this? What's your impression?
Yes, well, Turkey has, a very big influence on the conflict, and we saw that in the Second War, where Turkey did provide military assistance to the Azerbaijanis that proved to be very effective against our Armenian forces. I don't know the level of such military cooperation. That said, I do believe that there is room for a discussion between Turkey and Armenia, not about Nagorno-Karabakh in particular, but even with all the difficulties inherent in the Turkish-Armenian relationship, I do believe that it would be important to have some confidence-building measures, small steps taken between Turkey and Armenia that could eventually lead to better relations. I'm not talking about restoring diplomatic relations tomorrow. I'm talking about steps that can be taken. And as these steps are taken, these smaller confidence-building measures, I do believe that it does have an impact on what's going on in Nagorno-Karabakh.
And in the end, Mr. Ambassador, so how do you see the future of Nagorno-Karabakh and the final resolution of the conflict, taking into account the current situation and the geopolitical reality?
Ultimately, it's going to need to be resolved between the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan. They've met several times in the last several months. They should continue to meet. They should continue to have serious discussions between themselves on the way forward. I think they're doing the right thing to establish working groups and to seek a resolution to the many details that need to be resolved. And I believe that there is still a role for international mediation, helping the presidents to come together and to address the key issues that can lead to a lasting peace. What we don't want to see is further conflict on the battlefield. And the things that we have more recently seen in Karabakh with the electricity turned off, the gas supplies turned off in the middle of a winter. We don't want to see a humanitarian disaster there. So my call is for the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan to redouble their efforts at finding a lasting solution that can bring peace and security. I would like to see a day when relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan are again restored, and that Azerbaijanis and Armenians can live side by side in peace and security.
And Mr. Ambassador, can the final resolution of the conflict be without the existence or operation of the format of the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairmanship? Can a resolution be reached in other formats?
Sure, it can. And if the Council of Europe wants to play a role, and the parties accept that, great. There could be others who can come in and mediate, and others have tried in the past. There's no magic to the Minsk Group or to the OSCE, but I do believe there needs to be some kind of international mediation done. And I think that Armenia and Azerbaijan will, at the end of the day, also want the blessings of the international community on whatever agreements can be reached between the sides.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for a very interesting interview.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I was talking to former US co-chair of the OSCE Minsk Group, Ambassador James Uorlík.